Welcome, everyone, to ICSS Sunday Morning Marxist Forum. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the program committee for ICSS Sunday Morning Sessions. We're based in Oakland, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, USA. Our weekly programs are online via Zoom every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time. You can sign up at our website, icssmarks.org, to receive weekly email announcements for our Sunday sessions. You can also view videos of past presentations and send us a message using our contact form on our website, which is again icssmarks.org. We also want to call your attention to the coffee cup on our homepage where you can make a donation to support our programs. Our program today is on the war against Iran. A historic escalation of the war against Iran was launched by Israel and the US last month that included the assassination of Iranian civilians, government, and military officials, culminating in airstrikes by the US on Iran's nuclear materials processing facilities on June 21st. Iran launched defensive responses that included unprecedented airstrikes on Israel and US military facilities in the area. We are fortunate to have with us today acclaimed journalist, attorney, and anti-imperialist activist Dan Kovalik, author of The Plot to Attack Iran, to help us cut through the mainstream media propaganda on the war and the political situation in the area. Dan is a labor and human rights attorney who teaches international human rights at the University of Pennsylvania. He graduated Columbia University Law School and served as the in-house counsel for the United Steelworkers, AFL-CIO, until 2019. Dan has received the David W. Mills Mentoring Fellowship from Stanford University School of Law and the Project Censored Award for his article exposing the unprecedented killing of trade unionists in Colombia. Dan is also the author of The Plot to Scapegoat Russia, The Plot to Control the World, No More War, The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela, How the U.S. is Orchestrating a Coup for Oil, Nicaragua, A History of U.S. Intervention and Resistance, and Cancel This Book, The Case for Palestine. As usual, we'll start with the presentation, followed by a short break for announcements, and we'll have a group discussion where you can express your views on the subject and ask questions. And with that, I want to welcome Dan Kovalik back to Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me. And I want to wish happy birthday to Roger Harris, whose birthday is today, and to Norma as well. Thanks for having me back. Always happy to be here. So I just gave a presentation on Iran a few days ago here in Pittsburgh, and I obviously, for a more, I would just say, general crowd. And so I didn't assume a lot of knowledge. I'm going to assume a lot of you know about Iran and its history and the U.S. history with Iran. But I suppose I'll just quickly recap some of that because it's relevant. It's important to remember what has happened in the last over 100 years. First of all, going back even further than that, Iran is the only country in the region that was never colonized. It's had a long unbroken history of its society, its culture, and it makes it unique, not just in the Middle East, but frankly in the world. And I think that people need to understand that. Can people hear me? Someone said it, they're having trouble hearing me. Can people hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. And the one thing about Iran, which again bears repeating, is that first of all, it is, while it does have a theocratic leadership, that leadership operates kind of in parallel with a secular elected leadership. And I think it's very complicated how those two systems work together. I just learned over the last couple days, it came out that apparently, for example, um, in the secular leadership right now, you have a president who's known as the so-called reform president, who many have been critical for not being willing to defend Iran in, as aggressive of a way as many people around the world and many Iranians have wanted. And one may recall that at the beginning of the so-called 12 Days War, though I would refer to it as 12 Days Battle, because I think it's just merely one battle in a war that's going to keep going, I should say that Iran seemed to have been taken by surprise, even though the whole world knew that this attack by Israel was coming, right? Seymour Hersh oh no, that's something else. But anyway, it was very clear that that was coming. The press was already signaling that, and yet when Israel finally did attack, it did seem that it was able to kill some key military leaders while they slept, which, by the way, should be pointed out as a war crime, because they were not actively militarily engaged at that point. But nonetheless, Israel was able to do that and to hit some key military sites and kill some nuclear scientists, all in short order. What I read yesterday was that it was the Ayatollah Khamenei who kind of put things together within about 24 hours in order for Iran to be able to defend itself. So it's a very interesting dynamic there, and shows that, while the West is very critical of the theocratic part of the government, in this case, without it, things could have really turned out differently. And I just want to note that. But the other thing that needs to be pointed out is that while you do have this theocratic nature to the government, it's called, in fact, the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is nonetheless a pluralistic society. I would say much more so than, say, Israel, even Israel proper, right? There's many Christian churches that operate within Iran. There are synagogues that operate within Iran. There's 25,000 Jews who live in Iran. That's the second largest Jewish population in the Middle East. There's a Jewish hospital in Tehran that gets money from the Iranian government. And leaders of the Jewish community during the 12-day conflict came out in support of the government. So I think those are important things to note, that while it does have a theocratic government, I don't think it's fair to call it a theocracy. It is not a mono-religious state. And again, I would say it's less so even than Israel, and certainly much less so than its neighbor Syria, which is now under the control of these successor group to Al-Qaeda, and which is, as we speak, setting up a caliphate in Syria. It's the new government there, which has been recognized by the Western world, which is getting economic aid now, which is now working hand in glove with Israel, which is about to give the Golan Heights over to Israel, has been murdering Alawites, which is a religious Islamic minority in Syria. It's been persecuting Christians, including bombing a Christian church in Damascus, killing 22 people. That was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. This really is a theocracy that they're setting up. And by the way, everyone knew that that's what they were going to do. There's that famous declassified Defense Intelligence Agency document from 2012 saying that the West was supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria, and that the goal of Al-Qaeda was to set up a religious caliphate. So now Al-Qaeda is in power, and they're setting up a religious caliphate. So there's no surprises there. again, so Syria is going to turn out to be a much more a theocratic state than Iran, and frankly, a much less pluralistic one, and frankly, a lot less diverse one. What you're seeing in Syria is that Alawites and Christians are going to leave and are leaving en masse. You know, Syria was the birthplace of the Christian church, and Christians are getting out. That's a pretty incredible thing. And you're not seeing that in Iran. And in fact, in Iran, in terms of the Jewish community, they've been offered money by Israel. Individuals are offered money to move to Israel. And you know, most have rejected that. They won't even leave for the money. So that again, those things need to be pointed out. It is not the kind of you know, again, it's not as is being portrayed in the West. And of course, it also needs to be said that the Islamic Republic came out of the revolution against the Shah of Iran in 1979, or that culminated in the ouster of the Shah in 1979. And there would be no Islamic State had the Shah not been imposed by the United States to begin with in 1953 as the replacement for Mohammad Mossadegh, who was the prime minister, the democratically elected prime minister that the U.S. overthrew because he had nationalized British petroleum. People need to be reminded that, you know, we'll never know what a country like Iran would look like had that coup never happened. We don't know what it could have grown into. Same thing in Syria, you know, which, by the way, Syria had, while Iran was the first victim of a CIA regime change in 1953, Syria was a victim of the first post-World War II regime change by the U.S. by a predecessor of the CIA in 1946. So that needs to be said. Again, and the CIA would then go on to attempt and sometimes succeed in various coups in Syria for years to come. Again, we have no idea what these countries would look like had these coups not happened. And so, in any case, Iran under the Shah, according to Human Rights Watch, by 1978, so the year before the Shah was overthrown, Amnesty International had concluded that Iran had the very worst human rights record in the world. And so the idea that somehow the West is promoting human rights and democracy in Iran and the Middle East in general is a sick joke, you know, obviously. And but the interesting thing, of course, is that there are a number of forces that aligned against the Shah and against his Savak, his brutal security service that the CIA helped set up. You had the Islamicists who were able to, you know, largely organize freely within the mosques, and that helped them to gain preeminence in the revolutionary movement. But you had leftists, you had communists, the Two-Day Party, you had students, you had strong unions, all that joined together to overthrow the Shah. But in the end, it was the Islamicists and the Ayatollah Khomeini who became ascendant, and also in part because it needs to be pointed out, the West in the end, and the United States in particular, allowed him to come back from Paris to Tehran. They could live with him more than they could the communists, not too surprisingly. So again, the fact that you have an Islamic Republic at all in Iran, the West bears huge responsibility for that in many different ways. And you know, obviously, you know, I'm talking to a Marxist group, and Obviously, most of you probably know that the Islamic Republic quickly turned on the Marxists and the communists and killed many of them. And in fact, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and I put this in my book, I found out actually was given a list by communists to kill by the CIA. So, obviously there's, as a Marxist, we have to be critical of that. At the same time, we also have to defend Iran against regime change, because it's not for us to decide what kind of government they have. And I had a very interesting discussion with a friend who's in the Tudeh party, which there's not much left of it. There is some, in mostly in exile. There's still some Tudeh party people there. I think it operates underground. But I met a Tudeh party comrade in Tehran in 2017, and he said exactly that. And I want to repeat it, because I think for anti-imperialists and leftists, we need to hear this. He said to me, look, your job as an American, Dan, is to defend Iran against U.S. intervention. And he said, my job as an Iranian communist is to fight and hopefully at some point overthrow the Islamic government, and build a socialist country. But that's not your job. Your job is to oppose U.S. imperialism. And I think those things need to be pointed out. I think, again, if you look at Syria, a good portion of the U.S. left did not understand that idea, right? A good portion of the U.S. left decided that they didn't like Assad and that it was okay for the U.S. to try to overthrow Assad. And I think that was a historic failure and mistake on many in the left of this country. And we need to learn from that. And I think when you see what's happening in Syria now, for example, with the destruction of its long-standing pluralistic society, it's pretty easy to conclude that whatever the failings of Assad, that what's there now is worse. And by the way, I know Syrians who think that, who initially cheered on the overthrow of Assad and then now regret it because of what's happening. And the same thing, the same fate would await Iran, right? I mean, I think that if the U.S. and Israel get their druthers and overthrow the current government in Iran, it's not going to be a democratic country. It will most likely be a country in which chaos reigns, like Syria, like Libya, like Somalia. That is to say that nothing good would come of that. I can tell you that for certain. The other alternative is you see the son of the Shah has now popped up his ugly head from Paris, and he's been going on the talking circuit. I saw he even gave an interview to Bloomberg. So that's another option the West is looking at, is reinstalling the monarchy, which again, none of us could like. So those are things important to keep in mind when we're talking about about what's happening with Iran and what I believe our job as Marxists is, and that is to oppose U.S. imperialism, oppose U.S. intervention. But the other thing that has to be said, even beyond that, is that it has to also be acknowledged that the Islamic Republic of Iran and its allies, Hezbollah, Yemen, Hamas, formerly Syria, but no longer, which are now collectively known as the resistance, are frankly the only hope that the Palestinians probably have of surviving this genocide. And on that basis as well, I think that whether you like the Islamic government or not, as people concerned about what's happening in Palestine, you kind of have to be rooting for Iran. I mean, that's just a fact. They're the good guys in this, and I can say that unequivocally. They've also been very helpful to other countries resisting U.S. imperialism and intervention, including Yemen, of course, including Syria before Assad was overthrown, and Venezuela. And those of us who've been to Venezuela can testify to the fact that probably Iran's done more to support Venezuela under Chavez and Maduro than any other country, even more than Russia and China. They've really been key in setting up or fixing Venezuela's oil industry, which was devastated by the U.S. sanctions. Iranian petroleum engineers who know a few things about petroleum were key to getting that back online after the sanctions had devastated it. As you recall, Iran sent shipments of fuel by sea to Venezuela, even though they were threatened to be bombed by the United States. They've set up these really beautiful grocery stores in Venezuela, stocked them with food and supplies, which were desperately needed for the people there. So they're very important in Venezuela. And again, that's really what really upsets the U.S. Let's be clear. They don't care that whether they're an Islamic republic or a Buddhist republic. What they care about is that they support the anti-imperialist struggle. And in fact, in the non-aligned movement, which still exists, although to me, and you can correct me if you know better, seems to only exist more or less on paper and has some meetings, but I don't know how much it does. But in any case, the non-aligned movement is often led by Iran. Venezuela and Iran have kind of rotated leadership of that, which is interesting. So I think, again, despite its shortcomings that, we see obviously as Marxists, I think Iran, for the most part, it must be said, plays a very positive role in the world. And yeah, I mean, those are things we just have to acknowledge the truth of. And again, it's very interesting that in this battle, this 12-day battle, that it was the Ayatollah who took control and was able to turn things around and ensure that Iran really was able to defend itself, not only defend itself, but really get some blows in against Israel. Query whether, the secular government on its own could have or would have done that, and so you have to kind of play the ball where it lies and say that it was good that he was there for that. And that the, Revolutionary Guard as well was there. So again, those are my kind of remarks, more pointed towards a Marxist than I would maybe say for a more general audience. The other thing is that in terms of the repression of the left in Iran, there is some regret amongst the government that they had done that. I think they know that that was a mistake. It was done not in cold blood. I think it was done in the heat of the revolution and then the war with Iraq that followed, which was an existential war for Iran in which about 1 million people were killed. And that was a Western-backed war, of course. But I think there's regret with that and some ability maybe for the left to have some maneuverability in Iran. And I, to the extent we could support that, I think that's totally legitimate, The other interesting thing about Iran, and then I'll just open it up to questions, because I think questions, again, from you are going to be more important so that I know what to emphasize. Iran has played a very pivotal role in U.S. democratic functioning in a very strange way. So we have to be reminded that you have this October surprise that Reagan pulled off. So when the hostages were taken in Iran and they were held, Carter was trying to get them released, and Reagan felt that had that been successful, that Reagan would have lost the 1980 elections. And so apparently Reagan, through his contacts in the CIA, went to the Ayatollah and prevailed upon him to hold the hostages longer, right? Through the elections and the inauguration so that Reagan could be elected. And that happened. I remember vividly, and I was only 11 years old at the time, that Reagan was inaugurated, and within 2 hours, the hostages were released. So that was not just a coincidence. And then, of course, Reagan would go on to play, very treacherous role with Iran, selling them arms. At the same time, it was arming Iraq against Iran, right? Selling them arms in order to arm the Contras against the Sandinistas, who also had a revolution in 1979. And those revolutions have been, have kind of run on an interesting parallel track. But that, it shows that the machinations the U.S. has in these other countries do undermine our own democratic functioning as well, right? As well as other things, because of course, in the case of the Contras, Reagan also, as we know, his CIA facilitated the sale of cocaine on the streets of the United States in order to fund the Contras, in addition to illegally selling Iran weapons at the time. So you see how these regime change operations also cause regime change here and cause an undermining of democracy, which I think is one thing and maybe people don't think about a lot, and another reason to oppose these regime change. So I'll just conclude by saying that, look, I do think this war is not over. Many people believe that Netanyahu was in D.C. to meet with Trump to plan the next attack on Iran. I think that's probably true. And of course, this could all end up in the firing of nuclear weapons, most likely by Israel, which of course has, nuclear weapons, but won't disclose that fact, right? Which makes the whole tempest in a teapot about Iran's alleged nuclear ambitions, which don't seem to exist, so ridiculous, given that Israel has maybe 100 to 200 nuclear weapons and won't even, publicly tell anyone. So, but I think the use of nuclear weapons is a real possibility now, either in the Middle East theater or in the Ukraine-Russian theater as well. So it's a very dangerous time, and another reason we need a peace movement, an anti-imperialist peace movement, to resist all this. Okay, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Dan. After a few short announcements, we're going to have questions and comments from participants.
Right.
To ask a question or make a comment, everybody, please raise your hand by clicking on the reactions button, raise hand, at the bottom of your Zoom window. We want to remind everyone to please keep your questions short, keep them to the topic at hand, and ask one question at a time to allow everyone to participate. Also, keep in mind that this is a comradely forum for political discussion. Please show respect to other participants, the speaker and moderator of today's session. Coming up next week, we're going to have a session on the AFL-CIO's foreign operations with speaker Kim Skypes from, I believe, Purdue University, who will be speaking, who is the author of the AFL-CIO's Secret War Against Developing Country Workers. If you are interested in attending that session or future sessions, you can sign up for email notifications. for future programs at our website at ICSSmarks.org. You can also make a donation to support our programs. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look. We have a lot of hands that are raised, and I'm going to start with Philippa. So if you would please unmute yourself, Philippa, and go ahead and ask your question. There you go.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I was trying to open up the video. Yes, thanks very much for that. You mentioned that Iran and the resistance is Gaza's only hope to stop the genocide. And I was wondering how that could happen, given that most countries are not placing sanctions on Israel and are in fact continuing to trade with it, including China, who's Israel's third largest trader. Also, Ireland, of course, is second largest trader, which is, given its very vocal opposition to the genocide, is absolutely appalling. So I was wondering, what hope can we have from Iran and the resistance? Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. When I said that they are the last hope, that doesn't mean that, they're going to be decisive. They're necessary, but whether they'll be decisive, I don't know. For the reasons you say, I mean, it really is very troubling. And we seem to be reaching very quickly the end game in Gaza. I mean, right, the starvation's a very serious thing now. I mean, people are dying now of starvation and disease related to starvation. This is only going to accelerate. So time is of the essence. But I think at least up till now, for example, Iran's, fighting, its missile attacks during those 12 days were very devastating to Israel. Israel just acknowledged, I think, that Iran hit 5 military bases. Of course, they destroyed the port city of Haifa, which has been taken offline as a port. And that's in addition to the other port that the Yemenis have shut down, the port of Eilat. And you have many Israelis who are either leaving or trying to leave because of the economic devastation that Iran's been able to, and Yemen too, aligned with Iran, have been able to, inflict upon Israel. So I do think that, I mean, the interesting thing is that it may be necessary for Iran to militarily defeat Israel in order for the Palestinians to survive, is the truth of it. And Iran will not start that war up again, but Israel might, but in Iran is saying they will fight harder even this time, that they barely got started. So that also may be how Gaza is saved, is if Iran militarily forces Israel to back down or to be defeated. But what you're saying is correct in that, the world has failed Gaza. I mean, that just has to be acknowledged. I mean, and as you say, Russia and China have done very little to nothing to stop this. I mean, what I've also been surprised about is not only, I think it's a lot to expect any country to militarily intervene in Palestine, but that Russia and China aren't sending huge ships to Gaza with humanitarian aid. That I don't understand. I truly doubt that Israel would fire upon a major frigate of Chinese and or Russian vessels, but there's been nothing. It's been very strange. And then, of course, the Arab and Muslim world have just been downright complicit, right, with Turkey, with Azerbaijan selling oil through Turkey to Israel. Without that oil, Israel couldn't keep this war up, right? The Gulf states have helped out, including in the war against Iran, obviously including in the war against Yemen, which has been going on since 2015. Jordan's done nothing. Well, and that's even being too kind to Jordan. Jordan has helped Israel intercept missiles from Iran and allowed Israel to use Jordanian airspace to attack Iran. Egypt has just been completely docile in allowing, in contravention of the Camp David Accords, allowing Israel to take over and shut down the Rafah crossing, preventing humanitarian aid from getting in. And then when, what was this, a couple weeks ago, when thousands of people from all over the world went to try to, end that blockade of the Rafah crossing, the Egyptian government took their passports and arrested a bunch of them, deported a bunch of them. So, yeah, I mean, the world has been, absolutely terrible in confronting this. Again, with the exception of Iran and Hezbollah and Yemen. I mean, that's just a fact. Others have said some good things. There is going to be this Hague Group meeting coming up in Bogota on the 15th and 16th of July, meeting this Tuesday and Wednesday, which Colombia is hosting. It's going to be a meeting so Colombia and South Africa are going to host it from Bogota. A number of global South countries are going there to talk about what can be done to stop the war in Gaza. So that's some hope too. I think we can add that to what Iran's doing. But in the end, it probably will take some sort of military intervention to stop what's happening. I know it's a long-winded answer, but I think that needed to be said. So there you go.
Okay, next is Riva. If you would unmute yourself and ask your question. You're unmuted.
Hi,
There
Dan.
you go.
Hi.
First, thanks. I refer to you as one of the only attorneys who has the guts to say that Russia was legally entitled to do what it did in Ukraine. So thank you.
Oh, and
Yeah.
by the way, Riva, I need to tell you, so that raises, I have to amend the biography that was announced. That led to me being fired from the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, where I
All
was
power
teaching.
to you.
Yeah.
So the question is, I'm sorry, it's noisy here. I live in Jamaica now. It's going to be an expat.
Wow.
Do you think the prior Iranian president, the helicopter crash, was an accident or not? And how does the new president differ? Because I understand he's a bit more sympathetic to the West. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I have my doubts, of course, whether it was an accident. I do wonder if it was a Mossad operation, or who knows, maybe it was an inside operation too. But it has all the feelings of a coup. And as you say, the new leader, the new president is very pro-Western, that even doesn't capture it. I mean, he's almost serving up Iran on a silver platter to the West. I mean, he seems downright treacherous, I'll be honest, in my own view. So given that radical change from one president to the other and the frankly suspicious manner of that president's death, I would have to say that it has all the earmarkings of an assassination and a coup. And who's benefited from it, cui bono, Israel has. So we can draw, at least we have to, believe that that's a very possible thing. I don't think it's been admitted to or proven yet, but I'm sure the Iranians are looking into it. So we'll see. We'll see what they have to say about it at some point. But we're still, of course, waiting to find out who killed Kennedy. So, I wouldn't hold your breath. There you
Okay,
go.
next is Mehmet. Please unmute and ask your question, Mehmet.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to see you, Dan. One thing that I'm seeing is, are we being relativistic here, or looking at things relative to other things? Because this is now a trend in the Middle East. Countries like Iran, you mentioned that they are kind of feeling sorry for what they have done to the left, and I'm assuming also to the working class. Just yesterday, Turkey also announced that they were sorry for what they have done to the Kurdish people, and it's close to genocide what they've done. But now that politically they are trying to establish the old Ottoman system that is not based on race fascism, but is based on religious fascism. They have gotten together with the Kurdish parties, trying to get the votes, of course, and this was directed by the US ambassador to Turkey. So this feeling sorry for what they have done, their crimes in the past, it looks like is only a show while they are connected to imperialism, and it doesn't go anywhere. You mentioned that your leftist friend saying that it's our duty to do the revolution in Iran while you take care of the United States not attacking. That is true, but it's also not helping the left in those countries if we were to just concentrate here. And behind the doors, we know that the rulers of those countries have very good relationships with imperialism, but they do put a show as if in Turkey now, the most hated imperialist is the United States, while Turkey ships all weapons to Israel and signs deals. And like I said, the ambassador tells Turkey to what to do, go back to the Ummah state of Ottomans and so on and so forth. And they do it by, they toe the line. So how do we approach this contradiction? Thank you very much.
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't see Turkey and Iran as in the same position. I agree that Turkey's well within the imperialist realm. Of course, it's a member of NATO for starters, wants to be a member of the EU. So, they're clearly in league with the imperialists. I would say Iran is not. It's not in league with the imperialists. I think that it plays a role that counters Western imperialism, and I think that's why the West hates it so much. So I would just say that I think there's real differences between the two. At the same time, I totally agree that we can't let Iran off the hook for its repression of the left, and that we need to support the left in Iran to the extent we can. I don't know how to do that, I'll be honest. I'm open to ideas, but I agree that, for example, the two-day party needs to be supported. And if the left makes a move to, take power or whatever, obviously we could support that. Although I don't see that as happening in the near future. I mean, I think the Islamic Republic is fairly strong, and again, to the extent it would be overthrown, it wouldn't be by the left. It would probably be by some sort of, crazy jihadist group. So that's just a reality. So I don't know what to do about supporting the left in Iran, again, except to oppose Western intervention there. But I agree with what you're saying. I don't think the countries get off the hook just for saying they're sorry. I mean, you're right. And it could all be BS. But in terms of how they relate to imperialism, I really don't see Turkey and Iran as in the same boat at all. In fact, I think they're very aligned, very aligned against each other, right? In Syria, we saw that, right? We saw Iranian forces and Hezbollah supporting Assad very aggressively against the Turkish and other Western-backed forces. So, is it a case of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Maybe in this case, there's some truth to that. I mean, that's not always true, but it is sometimes true. So anyway, those are my 2 cents.
Okay, next is Charlie Hinton. If you would unmute, please, and ask your question, Charlie. There you go.
Thanks, Dan. It's been very interesting. You talked about anti-imperial forces in the United States and developing a movement. Are there any groups that you think are in position to lead such a thing or are leading such a movement? Some of the socialist parties or
I mean, yeah, I mean, I would say that I would have to say the PSL and the Answer Coalition that it's in leading are frankly the one group that's doing something to organize peace protest and anti-imperialist protest. I think we have to give them their due for that. And workers were, when I lived in New York in the 90s, it was Workers' World that was playing a very good role in that. And of course, PSL split from the Workers' World. So those folks have, whether you agree with their politics or not, and I don't always, I have to give them their due for being very good organizers of the peace movement. I don't see many other groups stepping forward. I mean, there's some kind of left groups. You have NIAC and a couple other just, peace groups. But in terms of leftist groups, maybe someone can tell me differently, but it seems like the PSL is the only game in town. I don't see the Communist Party of the United States doing anything. The Socialist Workers' Party is completely, I think it's basically now taken over by the FBI. There's Zionists now, the Socialist Workers' Party. They were pretty decent at one time. So yeah, the PSL, I would say my hat's off to them. And in Pittsburgh, certainly, we'll have protests, peace protests, where almost everyone there is a member of the PSL. I'm not, by the way, but
what about the Refuse Fascism folks of RCP?
I don't know much about them. You like the Maoist group, the RCP, the
yeah,
Ben was the Benovakian or whatever. Is that his name? I don't know. Maybe maybe in New York they have a higher profile. I don't see them at all in Pittsburgh. And when I go to the DC protests, I honestly don't see them having much of a profile. So, but maybe in New York and maybe in the West Coast, I don't know, but I can't speak to that. But perhaps.
Okay, next is Citizen One. If you would unmute, please, and ask your question. Citizen One. Okay, Polina, if you would go ahead, please, and ask your question, Polina.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan, for such a thoughtful and nuanced presentation. I think that conversation about what anti-imperialists should do, or what is the primary contradiction in this, is very important. I have two things. So first, I've heard from unionists that supposedly unions are either prohibited in Iran or union leaders are being jailed. I wonder if you have any information on that. My initial kind of intuition would be that sounds like pro-imperialist propaganda, but let's see if you have anything on that. And then the other one is the Mujahideen al-Khalq, their role currently in destabilizing Iran. They were pseudo-Marxist originally.
Right.
They're a terrorist organization. I'm hearing from Argentina, very interestingly, and I'll finish with that. There is a weird organization from Europe by the name of, it's an English name. Let me see one sec. I'm looking at this very quickly. Alliance, here we go. Anyway, so the MKO is hiding behind the European NGOs right now, and they're writing letters to parliamentarians all around the world, in Argentina specifically, because they have a pro-Israeli government under Javier Milei, and they're asking them to sign on to basically a letter supporting regime change in Iran. Okay, so I'd like you to comment on unions in Iran and the role of the MKO currently. Thanks.
Yeah, so, well, I'll start with the MKO, also known as the MEK as well, which was on a US terrorist list, I think till 2012, if I'm not mistaken. I think Obama took them off. I'm pretty sure. And because basically the West now supports them, just like you saw the Al Qaeda group in Syria, they've been taken off the terrorist list too, right? Because they're our terrorists, right? And the MEK is our terrorists, or MKO, as you say, is the different people use the different initials. And they've killed about 17,000 people within Iran. I think there's still a powerful movement that the West is supporting for regime change and are very dangerous. And by the way, I do think that the repression against the Marxists in Iran was somewhat inspired by the fact of the MEK claiming to be Marxist, right? I mean, I think it really did. They became a lightning rod for the left. They drew fire upon the left because of their existence and their tactics. So that is an interesting dynamic to all of this. In terms of the trade unionists, I'll be honest, I don't know what is happening with the trade union movement there at the moment. I think it's pretty small. I think it is fairly underground, and or if it's not, it's captive by the government. I don't know if trade unionists are being arrested at the present. Again, I think that did happen right after the revolution. But I'm happy to look into that. So that's something I need to look into. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, next is Raj. If you would unmute and ask your question, please, Raj.
All right, Dan, thanks very much for a very informative presentation. My question is, I think I don't like Mehmet. I think first of all, we have to support Iran in its when the United States and Israel attack it. Definitely, we have to defend the Gazans, given how harshly Israel, if it's not a genocide, it's close to it. But here's the problem. I think the United States, by destroying the left alternative in the Middle East, has effectively handed power to Islamists. And Iran is a very long and mature civilization, has handled that situation better than others. But I think it's a problem. How do you see coming out of it? Because, I don't see Iran being able to live, as an Islamic state, being able to live with Israel, which is a pretty ugly state at the moment. But Israel is not going away, and the United States is not about to abandon it. So the whole thing is in a very strange place. Will it lead, in your opinion, to Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon now?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, both Ayatollahs have issued, as you know, fatwas against maintaining or building, maintaining, and using nuclear weapons, which are religious edicts. But as I understand it, those edicts can be changed as circumstances change, as the Catholic Church also, morality seems to be pretty, situational, even for the churches and the mosques. I think they'd be foolish not to get one at this point. I mean, I think that when you're being bombed because people claim you're merely thinking about getting a nuclear weapon, and like you've already agreed not to have one and not to enrich it above your uranium above a certain point, and you follow that and they still bomb you. I mean, what other choice do they have? I don't know, So I wouldn't be surprised if in the near future they would announce they're a nuclear state. Again, I almost think it would be foolhardy not to. And that's the sad part of this, that's the lesson the West has given the world, right? You got to get a nuclear weapon. When Gaddafi gave up, he tried to deal with the West, and he said he wouldn't get nuclear weapons. They overthrew him, right? You look at North Korea, for the most part, they're left alone because they have nuclear weapons. I mean, that's the lesson we've all learned. And Noam Chomsky's been saying that for years. Now, just in general, responding to your comments about how the West has handed the Middle East over to the Islamicists, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, it's not even that they allowed it to happen. They did it, right? They would rather have Islamicists, radical Islamicists in power than secular nationalist governments like Nasser in Egypt. And so that's where we're at, as you say. So you look at Iran, and as you say, it's Islamist, but it's not fanatical like some of the other Islamicists. And like, is that the best we can do? No, it's probably not. But, where are we at? There is a fairly strong communist party in Turkey. Outside of that, I don't know in the Middle East if there's a strong left anywhere to contest either the right wing or the Islamicists. So I don't know where that leaves us. I think in the end, I look at Iran again as I would a Nasser in Egypt. I mean, by the way, Nasser was tough on the communists too. But I think the world left embraced him to some extent as a legitimate anti-imperialist nationalist. And I think that Iran fits that same mold. It's anti-leftist. Yes, that's true, but it's also anti-imperialist. So, but that's where we're at in the world. Where is there a strong left? Not in many places. I mean, India has a strong communist current. Nepal, but then you're kind of stretching after that. I mean, obviously, in China and Vietnam, they have communist parties in power, but obviously there's huge debate as to how truly socialist they are. But, that's where we find ourselves in the post-Cold War. Post-Cold War. The left is very lonely out there. And, I don't know. I think it does force us to make alignments maybe with countries that we wouldn't otherwise be thrilled about. That's how I see it.
Okay, we have a question from Kathleen that was in the chat. Does Dan think that Iran could have dealt a decisive blow to Israel in the recent battle? And does he think Chinese and Russian interests play much of a role in what Iran thinks it can or cannot do? That was from the chat.
Yeah, so two very good questions. I do think Iran could have dealt a decisive blow. They seem to always pull their punches, as far as I can tell. On the other, but I mean, I think they had the power to do that. Of course, the tightrope that they walk is that if they had come close to that, would Israel have launched nuclear weapons? Right? They have to take that into consideration. And so, could they have maybe dealt a decisive blow? Yes, but maybe that would have resulted in them being, annihilated through nuclear war. I don't know. That's the problem that Iran has. That's the problem everyone has in that region with Israel. They're the only country that is armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. So that's always going to give them an upper hand, right? Now, in terms of Russia and China, obviously, Iran, I'm sure, thinks about them and talks to them when they decide on how to respond to attacks and whatnot. I mean, the interesting thing I learned about is that Russia offered Iran a mutual defense agreement shortly before this battle broke out, and Iran said no. I guess they have a principled opposition to to those sorts of mutual defense pacts. However, I do think once that attack happened, those 12 days were over, I do think that now they have signed those pacts with Russia and China. So that may be, again, that may change everyone's calculus now as the next round may come.
Okay, next is Janet. If you would unmute and ask your question, please. Janet, there you go.
Hi, sorry. I thought Jean was going to go next. So yes, thank you, Dan, for joining us here and for your presentation. You used the term theocracy and you refer to radical Islamists. And by this, I assume you mean Muslims like the Takfiris, which to me is like the fundamentalist Christians and Zionist Jews. I consider all of them as fundamentalists. And in that vein, Iran, Turkey, and other Muslim Arab countries are not theocracies, although Syria seems to be heading in that direction, sadly.
Yes.
I see a similarity between how the Muslims in Iran organized against the Shah and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt against Mubarak. Both were given official presence in their respective countries, while other groups couldn't organize officially or have space. That said, would you talk about the history of any indigenous, communist, or socialist movements inside Iran, including prior to the election of Mossadegh as Prime Minister of Iran, during the rule of the latest Shah of Iran, and since his 1979 ouster up to this day? I mean, so, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the Tudeh Party, which was a communist party, it is a communist party. Again, I think it's been largely devastated, was very important in the fight against the Shah. So during the Shah years, I think they, along with the trade union movement, which they heavily influenced, played a very key role in overthrowing the Shah. And but were largely wiped out after the Shah was overthrown by the Islamic government, quite sadly. So I don't think they play much of a role at all now, is the truth. They played a huge role after the overthrow of Mossadegh, and I believe they did even before he was overthrown. They were an important party that supported. I believe they supported Mossadegh to the extent that he was nationalizing the oil, and they've had a great history there. Again, though, I think they were greatly devastated by the post-revolutionary government. What else? What else? You seem to have a couple questions in there. What else did he want to ask?
Well, I just kind of the strain of communist socialist thought within Iran just generally.
Yeah, again, I think now it's fairly weak. I think it's weak. I think it was, virtually wiped out after the revolution. And then, of course, you had the collapse of the Soviet Union, which hurt everybody, right? I mean, which happened not too long after that. So, but I think it's pretty weak at the moment within Iran and the Middle East in general. As I said, I think Turkey has a fairly sizable communist party that has some influence. But I think that outside of Turkey, I think there's not much of a left within the Middle East. Now, remaining, because it's been devastated by the West. Now, you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, again, we have to point out the Muslim Brotherhood has been backed by the West from its inception. And the reason that they were able to have a foothold in Egypt is because the West was basically okay with them. However, when they came to power, the West did tire them and grow tired of them, and they put in Sisi in their stead, right? But the Muslim Brotherhood has played a very treacherous role in the Middle East against leftist and secular nationalist governments like the one in Egypt. Britain really used them against Nasser, for example. And by the way, so Jeremy Kuzmarov and I have a new book coming out on Syria. And the one thing we note in there is that the current Al-Qaeda government is Muslim Brotherhood. They're very aligned closely with Muslim Brotherhood. And that's why they get a lot of support from Qatar, which is also closely aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. So, and again, they've gotten a foothold in the region because the West has wanted it that way. And even as we know, Hamas is also Muslim Brotherhood, and we know that they over the years have gotten a lot of support from Israel.
They have separated from Muslim Brotherhood.
They have by now, yeah. But till recently, they had gotten support from Israel because they were Muslim Brotherhood, and that's why also they supported the overthrow of Assad. They intervened in Syria against Assad, right? Hamas did. Now, like you said, they regretted that and all that, but that's a fact. And again, that's all coming out of that Muslim Brotherhood, which I think is pretty much a pro-Western concoction in a way that the Islamic groups that took power in Iran, again, I don't think are. I think they're something very different than that. That should be pointed out. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, next is Golden, if you would unmute, please. Golden.
Hi.
You're unmuted.
Hi, Dan. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is, during that 12 days of bombing, right after the Iran bombing the US base in Qatar, President Trump thanked Iran, saying that, thank you for letting us know ahead of time, and which made it possible for, no lives to be lost. So don't you make it question Iran's sincerity of being anti-imperialist? I mean, at some point, the slogans in Iran like "Death to America," but once it comes to have an opportunity to really hit America, Iran is turning away. What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's true that they do pull punches, as I've said. They pull punches all the time. And maybe some of that is out of, for example, the desire of the current president of Iran to get along with the West, perhaps. But I also think it is a realistic reaction to the fact that if they hit the U.S. hard, the U.S. could nuke them. I mean, we have to be, right? I mean, they need to be restrained in what they do, or they could be wiped off the map. And I think, the U.S. sent that message back in Nagasaki and Hiroshima that they are willing to do that. And so when Iran responds, I would not look, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes and have to decide how to do that. You're right. They could do more devastating things against the U.S., but what is the U.S. going to do to them? And they have to think about that every time. They are not an equal of the United States in terms of military power. Not even close. They're not an equal of Israel because of the nuclear weapons, so I can't be critical of them for that. It seems to me that is a very rational position for them to take, to not go all the way, lest they provoke something awful. That's my belief. anyway.
Okay, next is Gene. If you would unmute, please, Gene.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Well, Dan, thanks so much for being here and giving us your insights on all these matters. It's really been helpful, and thank you. I just want to note also, I'm wearing my Veterans for Peace cap.
I see that. That's great.
Yeah, and Veterans for Peace has issued a statement condemning United States for bombing Israel, bombing Iran, and also for using troops, U.S. troops in the streets of LA and elsewhere on the immigration issue. So I just want to put that out there.
Great.
But the other thing, and if you want to say anything about that, that'd be appreciated. But the other thing I just wanted to say is I'm kind of on the pro-Chinese role in terms of world politics. I see China as a real new force as a global power. And, it hasn't started any wars, unlike another superpower. It has basically has no foreign bases except one in Djibouti, I think. And it's initiated things like the Belt and Road Initiative, which is trying to improve the infrastructure globally. So I see a real positive role that China has been playing in world politics, and I just wondered what your thoughts.
Can let's try to keep it on the topic, okay? We don't want to get into just a general discussion on China. Do you have something?
No, but it has potential. There is great.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll just quickly respond, though. I generally agree with you. I generally agree that China plays a positive role in the world. I am critical of its, current trading with Israel. Someone said it was the third biggest trading partner. I saw recently it was the first, but I don't know. We should look at that. But it's a major trading partner of Israel during this time, which I am critical of. But in general, I agree. China plays a very positive role in the world, I think. And also in terms of Veterans for Peace, I love Veterans for Peace. I admire those folks. I traveled to Nicaragua with them when I was 21 years old, and I love those people. Absolutely the best of the best.
And remind people you don't have to be a veteran to join.
That's right. The associate members. That is correct.
Right.
Okay. Next is Norma, and I'm going to ask everybody, we're getting close to the end, if you could keep it to one question on topic and keep it short. Appreciate it. So Norma, please go ahead.
Dan, your comments about Iran really tickled me. They're so different to look at what's going on. They're different to me at any rate, and I appreciated it. Have you written anything that I could reference that says some of that stuff?
I do have this book, The Plot to Attack Iran, which
okay,
and it's not long. It's very, I think.
Thanks.
Yeah, if I do say so myself, it's a good resource. So.
Well, that was an answer. Yeah, thanks.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. Thanks, Norma.
Okay, Dan.
Happy birthday to you.
Dan,
yes, I got that, and I appreciate that. I'm glad I asked everybody. It felt very good to get the responses.
Well, you deserve it.
Okay, next is Lucy. Please go ahead and unmute.
Dan, thank you very much for your presentation. It was good. The thing that I was noticing is that you seem to be pessimistic about the situation in general, but I think there's a lot of positive stuff. The one thing that the U.S. was intended to do in Iran was regime change, and they didn't accomplish that. And then I guess Iran did show that they have the capacity to defend themselves, but by forcing them to stop the war. Israel, if I have heard this, maybe it's not true, but my impression was that they did do some damage to Israel.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Really serious damage, and that it forced them to say stop or not entirely, like you said. It's probably a continuous thing. The fight is still going on, but it's not, I think, as bad as it seemed to be. Maybe, yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
first of all, I am very happy to hear that. I welcome hopefulness. I guess I apologize if I'm pessimistic. I haven't given up hope. I am very worried about Gaza. I do worry if they will be saved, and that really upsets me. I think it is the moral question of our times, and I do think it is a challenge for humanity. And if we can't save those people, I think it's a huge defeat for all of humanity. In the long run, I think will the good guys win, for lack of a better term? I hope so. It's a very tough time. I mean, honestly, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's been a slog. And I see Cuba struggling, holding on by a thread, and Venezuela holding on by a thread. And, it's a very challenging time. I don't want to say I'm without hope, but we're seeing a coalescence of Western forces that show no restraint in what they're willing to do, and that troubles me very much.
And at the same time, it seems like there is also a lot of the countries in the global south are beginning to look at BRICS seriously as an opposition, and I think it may become a very real force. Trump is very afraid of the dollar losing its losing the top of the feeding chain, or what do you call that? The highest predator at the top.
Yeah, the reserve currency. Yeah, of course, the irony of ironies is everything he's doing is going to guarantee that it will lose that step. Right? I mean, right? That's the incredible thing. But look, I agree. I see a lot of hope in the BRICS, for sure. Though it's a strange, it is a bit of an unholy alliance at times. India, for example, likes Israel quite a bit. They helped them in Iran. Apparently had spies on the ground there, and because they hate the Muslims so much that they were happy with the Zionists. So there's some weird stuff that goes on. But generally speaking, I think it's a hope. It is a hope. And again, this Hague group that's meeting in Bogota gives me a lot of hope too. So I'm not without hope, but I see the challenges. Let's just say that. I see the challenges. And there is moments I have despair. That is true. But I know that is a great sin, and I try to fight that. So.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Next.
Yeah, there you
Next is Dave. We're going to try and get everybody in, so please let's try to keep it short on topic. So Dave, please go ahead.
Hi, Dan. Thank you very much for your talk. I just will keep it brief. You mentioned that there is a struggle between the theocracy and secular forces in Iran. And recently I read the article on Middle Eastern studies, the two-day party of Iran and the land reform. So I just was wondering that it was surprising that the US was pushing Shah to have the land reform so that they will not have revolution. And at the time, the 50% of the land was owned by the feudal lords, 20% of the land was owned by the mosques, and 10% by the crown lands. And so the Khomeini came against the land reform then. And so after the Islamic Revolution, they did do some land reform, but I wonder that up to what extent they did the land reform. And if the present struggle, these groups within Iran are the one supporting the feudal forces versus the bourgeois forces, as you look forward, the country has to develop, and they will have to develop the industry. Question is what line they adopt, how do they develop? And a man on the street, does he really care about the power game? Does he care whether Iran has nuclear weapon or not? Because most of the world don't have the nuclear weapons, and they go on with their development. So I wonder if you can tell if an ordinary man on the street who's been a whole generation has gone by because of these restraints put by the sanctions by USA, and so are these the bourgeois forces which are fighting the theocratic forces, and for the bourgeoisie to succeed, they don't have to come to West anymore. I mean, the whole world, the Southern Bloc is all the developing capitalistic mode of production and the trade. So I wonder where does it stand? Why does a theocracy
2 minutes.
Okay, does a theocracy is willing to sacrifice its population for their dominance?
Well, I think it's a great question. There was some land reform after the revolution. I don't think it was very extensive. I mean, there is the Islamic Republic, which, by the way, views itself as liberation, is practicing a form of liberation theology. They do believe in helping the poor and that sort of thing. So they do have some very good social programs and whatnot. In terms of that, in terms of the balance of forces within Iran, I do think that the one, the power that is able to challenge the Islamic government is the bourgeoisie more than the working class, and I think it is pro-Western in its outlook, and would like to go back not to the Shah necessarily, but to a time when Iran was within the Western orbit. I think. And what does a man on the street want? The man on the street wants jobs and prosperity, and they don't care who gives it to them, right? I mean, I think a lot do think that. I mean, the truth is, Iran is sacrificing a lot by continuing to support the Palestinians, right? I mean, it's a big reason the West continues to sanction them and whatnot. And I'm sure people would be glad to. The average man or woman on the street would be glad to turn the Palestinians loose if it meant the sanctions ending and the country being more prosperous. I mean, is my guess. A lot of people would feel that way, though not everyone. I mean, but those are just, I think, true things. And I think if in 10 years somehow the Islamic government fell and it became kind of a bourgeois, more Western state, that wouldn't shock me. I think that could happen. Yeah, I mean, but that's what the sanctions are for, right? To encourage that. That's exactly what, right? It's to put pressure on the people to withhold support for the government, right? And to allow the bourgeois forces to win. So could that happen? Sure. I mean, look at what happened to Syria. That it did. Now that the bourgeois forces didn't come to power, you really did have feudalists come to power, but it did cause regime change. Those sanctions. So I hope that answers your question. So.
Okay, we've got a few more participants, and then we're going to run a few minutes over. But the last ones will have Virginia, Ann, and then Citizen One. Virginia, please keep it short and to the topic.
Hello, this, from Virginia's place. This is Daniel, and I'm very puzzled by Russia's and China's stance on this. They didn't seem to do much of anything in support of Iran, and yet it seems to me that they have tremendously to lose if Iran were taken over, suffered a regime change, and handed over to the West. I mean, now Russia doesn't want a NATO state over in the Ukraine, but how would they feel about the possibility of a NATO allied state in Iran? Or China, on the other hand, China gets much of their fuel from Iran, so they have a lot to lose. I mean, both Russia and China have a huge amount to lose if Iran fell. Why aren't they doing anything? That's my question.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, I think there's a few things that are happening. First of all, they did provide weaponry during the war. I mean, I know China sent quite a few airplanes full of weaponry, and Russia helps them with intelligence and missile defenses, and so they've done something. You're right; they could do a lot more. I think there's a few reasons they haven't. One is, again, Russia offered Iran this defense alliance, and it was Iran that turned it down. Okay, so that's an interesting thing. I think they might have agreed to it after the 12-day war, but not before. But also, again, it does go back to, China and Russia have to calibrate their response to these things. Because you're right, they don't want to lose Iran to the West or to terrorists, which would be terrible for them both. But they also don't want World War III, right? They have to be careful. They don't want to do something to provoke something that's going to result in the exchange of nuclear weapons or, a conflagration like that of World War II. So I do think that's what restrains them, and maybe for the good of the world, it's good they're doing that. I don't know, because I don't know how the West would respond if they had gone full barrel and militarily intervened in that situation. So that's some of the considerations I think they make. Again, when push comes to shove, will they do more if they think Iran's under existential threat? I would think so, but we'll see.
Okay, next is Anne. Please go ahead. Anne, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Okay, sorry. Dan, you said that there was not much left around in the world. There was not many left movements. First of all, just briefly, you're leaving out the alliance of Sahel states in Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, which are nationalizing natural resources right and left, kicking the France out, etc. Also,
Right.
Eritrea on the Red Sea, which is a key player in this West Asian strategic theater we're talking about that nobody talks about. So that's just one point. As you were going along, I was thinking, well, okay, it's obvious that Iran needs a bomb. Everybody knows Iran needs a bomb now, including the U.S. and Israel. I'm hearing an echo or something, and including U.S. and Israel. So the question is, how long do they have to do it, and how far will the U.S. and Israel go to stop them? And then lastly, you sort of dropped a bomb as I was thinking about that and following along. Suddenly you said that Russia and China had signed mutually assured destruction agreements with Iran. Unless I misheard you, did you say that?
No, mutual defense agreements.
Mutual
defense. Meaning if one is attacked, that would be viewed as attack on them and they would respond.
Yeah, but a nuclear attack.
Not just a nuclear attack. It would be, if any attack, that mutual defense agreement would trigger, it would be, a treaty in which if one of those countries is attacked, they would respond.
Okay, I mean, my response was that changes everything. If Russia and China are behind Iran with nuclear weapons, suddenly that changes everything. I did a Grok and an AI search and didn't see any sign of any kind of agreements like that. But am I misunderstanding something?
No, I mean, it's my understanding that has happened. I could be mistaken, but I thought that those were being signed if they haven't been signed already. But yeah, that would change the calculus. Of course, it would. if they would follow through with that, obviously. As I said, Russia offered that to Iran before the 12 days, so-called 12 days war, and Iran turned it down. So I think that is certainly on the table for Iran if they want it. I'll just say,
wouldn't
yeah,
wouldn't that change things every bit as much as Iran having its own bomb?
well, maybe so, maybe so.
Okay.
Okay, we only have time for one last question. Citizen one, please ask the question. Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead, Citizen one, please.
Yes, someone else is talking. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
go ahead. Sorry.
Anyway, I had technical problems before, and
Yeah, that's okay. Please go ahead and
yeah.
ask your question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yes, so I'll make this very brief. Only because of the description of today's speaker mentioned his book on so-called cancel culture, I would be remiss not to cite again my analytical commentary criticizing Dan. The commentary is called Cancel Culture Critic.
Okay, Citizen one, please stick to the topic. Ask your question. We're running over, so please go ahead. Ask your question.
You dropped the bomb.
Okay. It was in the description of today's program.
Okay,
so that's
listen,
why I'm
do you have a question about today's topic?
Yes,
Alan.
I will ask my question immediately. I just want to repeat the article.
Go ahead and
was
ask your
called
question.
Cancel Culture Critique, which you can also find by entering Joseph Anderson plus
we
Berkeley plus Dan Kovalik.
the thing is,
my
people
question-
are interested, came here today
Yeah.
to listen to a discussion about Iran.
I do, yes.
And it is really disrespectful to the group.
You have it in the description.
And to the speaker and to
You have it in
just
the
because
description.
you mentioned his book is the topic today on cancel
You
culture.
have it
or
in the
on Iran?
description.
I'm sorry, you're
today's
gonna have
guest.
to accord to the what we're asking, or we're gonna have to ask you to not intervene. Okay.
Hello, Alan.
Yes.
Alan. Are you ready for my question? Are you ready for my question?
Go ahead and ask your question. Go ahead.
Ew, censorship on the left. So are we going to have a war with Iran?
We are in a war with Iran, and it will continue. Yes, unfortunately.
Where are the missiles and bombs dropping over Iran?
Well, they already have, and I think they will again. I think this will be an ongoing confrontation. There's been an exchange of weapons happening certainly between Iran and Israel since October 7th.
I mean, the U.S. Where are the U.S. other than the token attacks where each side telegraphed the others to get out of the way because we're going to attack you? Where is the ongoing U.S. war?
I think that Dan was very clear in answering that question early on and saying that this was a battle in a larger war. And I think that he's answered that question.
Let's not have it back and forth, please. If you have a question, please just set it up and let the speaker.
So I think what we're going to do is we're going to end the session now. I want to thank Dan for participating.
There's one more.
Alan. One more.
Hello. We're going to end the session now, and I want to thank Dan for coming and speaking. This was an excellent session. I want to thank everybody for your questions. It was a really informative discussion, and we look forward to having Dan back in the future. Very much a welcome contributor to our program. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, and have a great Sunday and a great week.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.